welcome everybody to this webinar on Riskrunner. I am Alex Ruijter, one of the founders of Resilium. Just to introduce what Resilium is. So Resilium is a consultancy company. We consult people in risk management, particularly more like operational risk management, using a bunch of tools like bowtie, but also just barrier management in general. We've been helping organizations implement barrier management and critical control management for a number of years. And I've been using a bunch of the tools that are available in the market to do that. But we found for some of the things that we wanted to accomplish with our clients, the tools that are available in the market don't do everything we want them to do. So we decided to go out and build a tool that did some of the things that we were missing from the market. And so I want to talk about what we did. The tool is called a Riskrunner. It is basically all the things that we'd like to have in a tool, and we built it. And so I want to talk about three things that it tries to solve and the way it tries to solve them. So I try to focus a bit on also just highlighting the more the concepts behind what we're trying to solve, as well as give you a couple demos of what the tool actually looks like. But yeah, I wanted to also give you a bit more background on the concepts behind it. So the three problems are this. One is overcomplicating or oversimplifying your risk. So finding the right level of detail when you're doing risk analysis. The second one is monitoring change in your level of control over time. So making sure as the world changes that you sort of change with it and you monitor the changes. And then the third one is using a consistent approach across a larger organization. So these are I think three recurring problems that happen a lot in larger organizations. And so we decided to take a crack at solving them. By the way, if people have questions, I think the chat is a good place to just put questions in the chat. And then at the end, we'll just have a Q&A. I think the presentation itself is around 30. I'm not going to do the full hour that was set for it. So we have plenty of time at the end to do a discussion. All right, so first one, overcomplicating or oversimplifying your risk. So I think if you take the extremes of what this means, is that if you do all of your risk analysis, in a hazard register, so basically just using an Excel sheet with some columns, you're probably oversimplifying things for some of those risks, right? Because some of them are a little bit more complicated than that. On the other extreme, if you're using bowties for everything, you are probably overcomplicating things, because not everything needs to be a bowtie, right? But that leaves you in the middle, where you want to have some risks that are more simple. You want to perhaps leave them in a more register format, but for some of them you want to do bowties. Now, what often happens in existing tools is that you then end up with split registers. So some of the information lives in an Excel sheet and some of it lives in a bowtie diagram, but there's no integrated place where everything sits together. And so what we wanted was to integrate these two things into one. So we built something called, or developed something we call the progressive risk model. The idea is that you have one integrated risk register that you can progressively build up. And instead of talking about it, I'll just show you what that means, because that, of course, doesn't mean anything to anybody. So here's a Riskrunner with a working at height hazard. And what you're currently looking at is a more traditional hazard format. So we have a bunch of columns with top events, threats, barriers, and consequences. And this is what you might see in an Excel sheet, right? You have different columns, and they're basically unlinked. So this is what people often do in the beginning to do a quick scan, right? So you do a quick study to go over all of your hazards. to determine if there's high or low risks, what your high risks are and what your low risks are. But what you can't see in this format is which barriers belong to which scenario. So like, have you actually covered all of your scenarios or not? So what we wanted to do is say, okay, instead of this, you can actually make links. So in this case, also that barrier belongs over there, the railing, let's say here. And so I can start to like link things together. And so this is one level down in the progressive risk model, is that you still have this hazard format, but it is linked together. So the barriers are linked to where they sit in the scenarios, which means you can see two things. One is, did we actually cover all of our scenarios? And the other is like, am I more like a left leaning or right leaning in my controls? So this is already one level, let's say more, it's, I guess, better for me, at least often. If you want to go more down, so here I see, for instance, I have two top events for working at height. One is a dropped object, the other is a fall from height. I can say, well, a person getting hit by a dropped object is definitely only relevant for the dropped object. And so that would then, as soon as I like do that, it splits it out into a separate format. And I can do the same with fall from height. So I can sort of drag things into each other. And now I have one level more connected, let's say. This is, in terms of a data model, is a bow tie. It might not look like a bow tie, but you have a hazard that has a top event, and the top event has threats, consequences, and they all have barriers. So we've now gone from what is more like a hazard format into a bow tie format. So that is sort of the idea behind the progressive risk model, is that you can go from a very simple table format and upgrade it slowly into a bow tie format. So the advantages of this is that you get an integrated risk register. All your risks will live in one risk register, whether they are very simple or very complicated. You can keep them in one. You can also like gradually deepen your analysis. So you can start off with a more superficial, and then over time sort of upgrade parts of it. The other nice thing is that all the barriers are first-class citizens. So whether they are in like a table format or in the bow tie, you can do cool things with them later on. Because they're all just barriers. And the last advantage is that because we have this data structure, we are very flexible in the types of data we can import. So if you have like an existing risk register in Excel, it is quite simple to import it, because we have a data structure that basically allows us to import Excel sheets. And then from there, once you've imported, then you can start to like work on it and like improve on it. Okay, so that's the first part. The second part, monitoring change in your level of control over time. This is a slightly bigger one. So the way people tend to do this is by tracking incident statistics. So if your incidents are going up, it's bad. If they're going down, it's good. So here's some statistics over a multi-year period for like aircraft accidents and road safety. Yeah. And so in both of these, I think these curves are sort of general for safety in the, let's say, in the modern world. So it tends to go down, which is not, it's of course very good, but more safety means less data in this case. So as we get less and less incidents, it becomes less and less of a reliable source to monitor your safety. So at some point you have so few incidents that you cannot really use them anymore to monitor whether you're doing a good job or not. So instead, as the next best thing, as you like lower your tolerance for incidents more and more, you have to sort of switch to monitoring barrier performance, because that's just the next best thing besides like monitoring incidents directly. And so that's really, measuring barrier performance is really nice, because you don't need to wait for an incident. Your barriers are always there. and you can sort of check on them. It's also more relatable than an incident, because barriers are often things that people are working with day to day, whereas the incidents tend to be more exceptional things. So barriers are usually more relatable. The downsides of measuring barrier performance is that if you have an incident, it will tell you if you've been looking at the wrong scenario. So if you, for instance, like missed a scenario, having an incident is a very direct way to figure that out. If you're looking at barriers only, you will not figure out that you've been looking at the wrong incident scenario. So that's sort of a downside of looking at barrier performance. So barriers are also like a proxy to the actual risk. So when you're doing, for instance, a bow tie analysis, you're making assumptions about like how effective a barrier is in a particular scenario, but you can never really know for sure unless you actually have an incident. You don't know the true effectiveness of a barrier. So you have to make some assumptions, which is a downside, of course. But it's the best thing you've got besides having the actual incident. So like it's the best you've got, basically. So how do you actually measure that? So I will argue there's three rough ways to do it. You can either have some type of self-verification, some type of other verification, or automated verification. And then depending on the type of organization you are and how technical versus how behavioral you are, the mix of these three things will be different. So just to go through them a little bit. So self-verification, basically the idea here is that if you have a barrier owner, so somebody who's like responsible for maintaining a barrier, that they verify the performance themselves. The nice thing about this is that you can apply this across the board to all of your barriers. Doesn't matter whether they're technical or behavioral. You can basically just have self-verification for everything. Another benefit is that you keep the focus of the control owner, so the people responsible for the barriers. You keep their focus on what is important in the organization in terms of like keeping your risks under control, because they have to like give updates or like do the verification themselves. It's also relatively easy to set up. The downside of this is that it's very vulnerable if your incentives are wrong in the organization. So if people get fired for saying that their barrier is not doing well, that's a really great way of getting all green in your dashboard. So suddenly your barriers will all work very well if you do that. So this is very vulnerable if you have like wrong incentives. It's also more effort in the operation, which I think is the main downside probably. People have to like fill in yet another thing. So it's can be high effort depending on how you set it up, of course. Then you have other verifications, basically like an auditor or somebody else that checks on a barrier, which is good for things that don't have a focus or ownership. So that's somebody else, basically like a cleaning truck at the back, like cleans up and checks up all the leftover barriers, let's say. It's really good for that. It's probably the lowest effort to set up because you have like a relatively small amount of people that do the checking. The downside here is that it's usually more superficial than self-verification, because the people that are actually working with the barriers tend to have more in-depth understanding of how it's really doing. So then this tends to be more superficial. And also a downside is that you can have like an us versus them mentality, where it feels like somebody's checking up on you, and that can feed into that. Then the last one, automated verification. So this is more objective, of course. So that's the nice. So this is basically where you would have an automated data source, like your SAP system, and it calculates the performance of your barriers automatically. So the nice thing about this is that it's objective. It will give you, given the same input, you will get the same outputs usually. It's also very low effort when you're in the actual operation. So when it's all set up, it's very low effort because it's automated, right? So that's why you don't need to do a lot for it. The downsides, I've done this type of work. It is a lot of effort to set up, and when the organization changes or you get to some different insight, it's also very difficult to change after the fact, right? So because it's like more technical thing to do. It's also very easy to measure the wrong thing. So the fact that you, for instance, have like maintenance data on a technical barrier doesn't mean that when your maintenance is good, that your barrier is also working well. So this is just an example, right? So if you're using like a maintenance backlog, it is an indication. So if you have a large backlog, it's probably a sign that it's more likely that a barrier will fail. But the reverse is not necessarily true. So if you have like good maintenance, that your barriers will work, that's not necessarily true. So it's very easy to get into lured into a false sense of security, because you're basically the validity of the data is not really matching the actual barrier. So what we said in Riskrunner, we want to start with self-verification. That's the thing we're going to launch now. The reason why is that it can be applied to everything, so it's a nice baseline to start with. And you have this property that you keep control owners focus on what's important, which is really nice. The main thing we have to be careful of is that it's a high effort in operation. So if you're asking people to give you updates on their barriers, you shouldn't ask them too much, right? You have to like perhaps even start with how much time do I want to spend, do I have from people to spend on this? Do I have like 5 minutes a week or 10 minutes a month? So you have to like start with that and then figure out like how much can I ask of people. So one of the things you can do in Riskrunner is you can add custom fields. So there's not really any built-in fields in Riskrunner. You have to configure it depending on your goal. So if your goal is to track barrier performance, you can just add a field for it, and then set up what we call a review to get people to give you updates. So I'll just give you a demo of that. I think this is it. So this is the screen if you're logging in to Riskrunner as a contributor, which is a separate role. Basically somebody who is just giving feedback. And in this case, they've been assigned a barrier performance review. So when they log in, they see this and they can click it. And that will pull up a barrier performance review. And so they have a couple of barriers that they need to give updates to. So in this case, I have an exclusion zone here, and they have to set the performance. So let's say this is good. Pre-work platform inspection. Let's say that's actually medium. We don't have the time. Railing. Still good. And then last one, weather monitoring. So this is actually poor. The equipment broke, for instance. Basically, I've now gone through this sort of more simple list. The idea is to give people that are giving you updates on how well the barriers are performing a really simple experience. So it should just be like a simple list they go through. So in this case, I will finish it. And it says now, okay, the review is finished. And then as the person responsible for these barriers, I can sort of go in and see whether monitoring and stop work. This is the page for that barrier. And I can see the barrier performance is now poor. And I can actually show the history. So I can see that it goes from medium to good, and now it's poor. And I can see sort of the story that people gave as to why they think it's now poor. I think that's a really important part, that you have like this more, I don't want to call it storytelling per se, but like that you can get the real stories from people that are actually working with the barrier about why stuff is the way, like why it's performing the way it is. And so for each field, you have this like history tracking, essentially. Okay, so I hope that was clear for people. Sorry for the technical breakdown. Then the last thing we're going to tackle is using a consistent approach across a larger organization. So I think what often happens in larger organizations is that it becomes like a Tower of Babel, in the sense that different sites use different terminology for things, and you get like it's difficult to share between different locations or different projects if people have their own little jargon that they developed. And so one of the things that we set up in Riskrunner is that all the names automatically create a definition. So for any barrier name, for instance, that you create, it automatically creates a centralized definition. The idea is that you can build up this organizational vocabulary and keep things consistent in the way you name things. So this is the general idea. If you have a bow tie, a barrier might appear on multiple lines. And so what we did is, as soon as you give a name to something, in the background it creates a definition for that name. And so everywhere that you use that name, it's sort of referencing the same definition. So in the software, basically, if I give I'm editing a barrier and I give it a name, then if that name already exists as a definition, it will sort of look up that definition, and then you can see the performance of it, because that field has been attached to the definition. And if there's any actions attached to it for improvement, then I can also see that, because those are also tied to the definition. So this is really nice, especially also from a technical perspective. This allows us to do some really cool things. So one of the problems that you have is that if you have like a corporate corporate environment that defines like the way risks should be managed and described, and for working at height, for instance, you have a particular standard way that you'd like to do that, and you add something to that, you can start a review at the corporate level and push that review down to all the different sites. And so they can either accept or reject it at the site, and then everything is sort of updated. So you sort of push changes down. But the same flow can also go the other way around. So you add something to a site and then push a review with that content, with a new barriers or a new bow tie, and you push that up to the corporate level for inclusion in the standard. And so from there, you can then, at the corporate level, they can push that new added content back down to all the different sites. And so then you can sort of have communication between your sites and the corporate level. So this is the part I'm actually currently working on. So this, if you don't use it, if you use Riskrunner today, this won't be in there yet, but this is the part I'm working on now. And we just needed all the other infrastructure to be able to do this correctly. Okay, I'll do the bonus one as well. So degradation factors. I think so in both XP they're called escalation factors, and I think in a lot of places they're called escalation factors. We decided, perhaps we should just use this opportunity to try to rename them to degradation factors, because it's just a little bit more intuitive, I think, for people that are not that are new to bow ties. For people that don't know what an escalation factor or a degradation factor is, here's an example. You're wearing a seatbelt, and then that's a barrier for to prevent you from getting injured in a car crash. And then an escalation factor here could be that you forget to wear your seatbelt, and then you have a seatbelt wearing alarm as like a escalation factor barrier. That's sort of the basic idea. So that you have a barrier and you're going to identify what is the ways in which your barriers can fail, and how you're going to stop that. So the main problem with escalation factors or degradation factors, so I have to use it myself, is that degradation factors really blow up your bow tie. So if you add them consistently, your bow ties tend to explode. And so we thought, like, perhaps it's just not the right place to put them in the diagram like this. because it also suffers from copy paste problems. So if I like have the same barrier, I have to like make sure that all the escalation factors are also the same in all the other copies. So probably not put them in the main diagram, but where should they go? We think they should also be living on the definition. So we have this nice like centralized barrier definition, and we're going to sort of stick the degradation factors on there so that anywhere you use that barrier, your escalation or degradation factors will always be in sync. So they are the same everywhere, and they don't pollute the diagram in the same way. Okay, I think that's, yeah, exactly on time. Wow, great. That's sort of a small intro to Riskrunner. This part, by the way, the degradation factor thing, we're working on that at the moment as well. So that's coming probably early 2025. So this was just, of course, like to introduce some of the problems we're working on with Riskrunner. I didn't actually show like in depth the whole tool and how it works. So if you are interested in that, you can just sign up for a demo. So if you go to riskrunner.app/signup, you can create an account, and then we'll get a ping, and then schedule a demo with you to sort of walk you through the tool and how it works in detail, and then you can try it out. You can attend the Riskrunner course. There's if you go to the website, there's a Riskrunner course that you can attend. There's one that starts like super quickly, like next week, I think already, or the week after. But there's a couple in the coming year as well. And then the let's say startup incentive that we are gonna give to people is the first 3 clients get 1 week of implementation support for free. So free consultancy, it's always great. Yeah, if there's any questions, I think we can go through the chat. But thanks everybody for listening anyway, coming to the webinar. I hope you are at least triggered a little bit. Let's see if there's any questions. So Peter Blokland, so why not keep everything neutral? Barriers is risk treatment options. Yeah, I mean, so all the terminology is actually configurable. So it's a really we could also, for instance, say control. I think it's even more neutral than barrier. So barrier, of course, has a bit of a weird connotation, perhaps. I do feel like any term you come up with, there is somebody who wants something different. So all the terminology in Riskrunner is just configurable, so you can make it whatever you want. From a tool perspective, I think that's better. Degradation factors, risk sources. Yes, I think why I like degradation factor is that you are trying to figure out, like, I have a barrier, and then there's ways in which it can degrade, so either like reduce the effectiveness or like completely break it. So you are talking about like degrading a function, a safety function in the organization. So I like the word degradation for it. Risk sources to me is a little bit more general, perhaps. Okay, any other questions? People can also shout if you want. We're not with that many people.
Did you already integrate this solution, the Riskrunner, with any of your clients?
We started with 1 client, but that was in an earlier stage. But right now, this is the 2nd week of launch, so it's really early days.
Okay.
So I think in the coming year, probably we'll start the first like a real projects. And then, of course, like I think this is it's nice because we're in this early phase of the tool, where, of course, some of the features that are not in yet because it's version 1. So this is really like what we think is a nice small tool that will actually be useful to do certain things. But then with the first clients on board, we'll be able to mold it into something that's really practical.
Great. And already you linked already Riskrunner to the bowtie app application or not?
About XP, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, so the interaction with bowtie is of course nice. I think like bowtie is still like a really great tool to build a bowtie diagram. And so you can import a bowtie diagram if you want. The export we're still working on. The tricky part is that we are a little bit more because we have also the hazard format, which bowtie can't deal with. So there's only like parts of the model that we can export. But I think like import export is like a super logical thing to do because bowtie is still a great tool to build a bowtie diagram in.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alex.
Okay, other questions?
Alex, just one question. Do you already produce also a report after you integrate all of the risk analysis or the Riskrunner?
Yeah, I should have mentioned this. So the entire application is one big API as well. So we developed it as a API first application. What that means is that it's really easy to integrate with other tools. And so currently the way we do reporting is with Power BI dashboards. So basically the Power BI dashboard just pulls data out of Riskrunner and displays it, which I think we'll keep because that's a really nice application. But for next year we'll start working on building like reports in the tool as well. So there's some reports. I didn't actually show you like the action tracking and stuff that's in there. But there's some reports on the action tracking. But we'll build more as we go along. Yeah. I think this is also a part that we want to do with clients, just to avoid that we're going to build like reports that nobody uses.
Great.
And for my understanding, you mentioned that you build it up an API and then go from there. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's multi-device. So it's no matter what device you use, that the API will run on, or the application.
Yeah. So the main client that we have now is just the website, but the website is I forgot the word, but basically it scales down to your mobile phone. Especially important if people are giving like updates on their barriers, right? So you want with that simple list that also works really nicely on the mobile phone, which I think is probably the main application. But then in the future, because it's API first, you can think of like having multiple clients, right? So we don't have that at the moment, but it's totally possible. Because I think you're talking more about like a native mobile application, probably.
Yeah, there was the idea that we have tablets or phones on the train that could update some of the risk analysis done on the central level.
Sure. Yeah. No. So the whole website is currently like mobile friendly, so you can just do almost anything. There's a couple like small exceptions, but almost anything on the mobile phone. And then I think in the future we might add like a mobile app, but that's a little further away because I want to focus on making like a great tool. Like the core should be really great first, and then we'll add like a mobile app.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Then I think thanks very much again for people attending. And just either sign up or just contact us if you want to do a separate demo and like dive into it a bit more. Oh,
thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Yes.
And,
Yeah. So yeah, one question from George. If you sign up, you will get like a thank you for signing up. Your account is not activated type screen. We'll contact you and do a demo, and then I'll activate you.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, everybody, and then hopefully talk to you in the future.
yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Thanks,
Thank you
Alex.
very much. Have a nice one.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.